Time for another draft science video presentation. I was going to do a subject video, but decided not to. I'm going to read a comment instead. And probably one comment. And just because it raises a lot of questions. So what the hell? This comes up a lot in physics, the utility of the truth. Somehow people measure the value of science based on what it's doing for them and all that kind of crap, and it really isn't about having right answers. And so somebody could make the comparison and just say, aren't we just arguing about whether it's gremlins or hobgoblins, right? We have effects in the world, and does it matter whether it's gremlins or it's pixies? That cause it. And we're pretty sure of effects. I mean, we're lived in the world, we see the effects, so sometimes it really just doesn't matter whether you know the right cause or not, because there's not much you can do about it anyway. I mean, you could blame mental illness on demons, or you could blame it on structural brain defects. Who cares? The point is, you can't do much about it, okay, because you can't change the structural brain defects, whether a demon caused them or just biology and chemistry and malformation in a fetus or something. What's the difference? You can't change anything about it. Knowledge isn't power in these cases, but it doesn't matter. You'd still rather have the truth. And having false notions will just mean it takes you longer. If you're going to be able to figure out the solution, then yes, you're going to be better off having the truth and know, okay, it's a brain defect, I have to prevent it in fetuses, I can't prevent it in adults. These kind of arguments can be made. We kind of know that already. We gain some knowledge in terms of preventative medicine, and there's lots of things we know about will harm a fetus in utero, and we do something to stop it happening. So in a way, knowing the truth gives us the power to do something to prevent things. But the idea of we're going to fix effects that we've been living with for maybe millions of years, some of them, we're not going to fix those. Okay, knowledge isn't going to be power for some things. You're just not going to be able to fix the fact that you can't fly and stuff like that. Not going to change. So generally speaking, you'd say that having the right answer is better. Having a right understanding of cause is a lot better than having a wrong understanding. It doesn't necessarily give you any more power to deal with the problem, though. It doesn't necessarily mean you can fix it easier or make it better for humans or some kind of crap like that. And again, this whole argument that science should be obliged to provide utility is sort of irritating. Just as a notion that these searches for the truth should be completely ordered by some necessity to produce human benefit, I would argue is kind of a crappy attitude. Clearly, to some extent, that's part of the problem that exists now, though, is that so much of what's done is done inefficiently and wastefully. There's a bunch of people doing stuff that they wouldn't be doing if they knew better, if they knew it was a waste of time. You could argue that colliders, big expensive waste of mental energy. I mean, all the people to create this thing, even though first it costs a lot of money, but it's not just the cost in money, it's the cost in that you have a bunch of smart people devoted to some purpose, and if they applied all that intelligence to some other purpose, they might have accomplished something that could mean something, that could actually be useful, like creating a lightning capacitor or something, some new way to store energy, that would be, you could argue, beneficial, but again, who knows if it's even beneficial, right? So that's another one of the calculations, is what is the most benefit to the human race, curing a disease or preventing a disease. And I would argue that much of the disease is in the very ambitions of the human organism, and that's the worst disease, is their attitude and their perspective on what they're entitled to here and what their reasonable expectations are. I mean, overpopulation, all of that kind of stuff. None of this stuff should be a problem for intelligence. That's not hard to figure out. You know, you have too many people in too little space and too few resources. Yeah, that's stupid. You know, and then when you're not even speaking the same language, it's even dumber. But anyway, alright, so I'll read the comment and say something similar over and over again, I guess. In terms of, first, I don't think it's a fair question. You know, what is your theory going to give me? What's in it for me? You know, its truth value should be the only thing that matters, in principle. And you know, and I would argue that, to me, it has a great deal of philosophical value to understand that it is a deterministic universe, a mechanical universe, and that there is no random woo and there's no God woo. There's neither an intelligence directing anything, nor is there any scapegoat bullshit, whatever you want to call it, a pseudo-God of randomness, and therefore I'm unique and I'm this and I'm that, and, you know, well, unique's probably the wrong word to use. I'm special because I'm random. You know, again, the argument could be that this whole idea of uniqueness doesn't mean anything when you recognize that, you know, every snowflake is unique, but snow is just a pain in the ass. Anyway, do these theories for mechanical gravity or light as particles actually make any different predictions from popular mainstream physics? Well, obviously it makes lots of pointing out. The obvious differences is that, well, you can't bend forces, so light isn't bent by gravity. That one's way off the mark. But does that mean anything? Does bending light with gravity mean anything? I mean, is there any application for this stupid notion? I would argue it's sort of inconceivable what the application would be. What possible use could it be to bend light? A minor tiny bit with a gigantic huge mass. I guess it couldn't have any frickin' utility. It can't mean anything. So it's sort of irrelevant, but the relevant part is the mindset that went into it, which is gravity's a magical force. It's not a real energy. You don't have to account for where it goes, so to speak. You know, you can just play some semantics game of saying, well, because anything that goes into gravity, if you take it out of gravity, you have to use up the energy again. Well, so what? That doesn't explain the fact that the Earth is full of it. You know, while it's making gravity, it's converting. It is doing something. And so again, I would argue that if you want to understand magnetism, you first have to understand where did the energy come from. And the energy came from the place you call the gravity. Okay, the place you said was magical bent space. That's where it came from. So if you have bent space wrong, and there's an actual force of gravity, then you can understand you could manipulate the force of gravity with something like a magnet. And that would be where the energy came from for the magnet to display a transfer mechanism. Anyway, okay, so different predictions. So yes, I predict that light is not bent by gravity. The only other predictions I can say is there's no entanglement, there's no spooky actions. All of those things are meaningless mush. But again, it's hard to say that, okay, I change the effects by changing the causes. That's not really going to happen. So everything you know is an effect is probably still going to be an effect, even if you know the causes. You're still going to have to deal with the fact that energy is conserved in most systems and all of that kind of crap. Alright, if Einstein and Schrodinger had never been born, so Einstein and Schrodinger are two probably bad examples, because yes, although bent space and relativity gives people room for lots of philosophical woo, okay, and that's really obnoxious. In terms of scientific woo, it doesn't mean much. So again, bent space didn't build the Hadron Collider. You know, these things, you know, even gravity waves, you know, they've gone way beyond anything Einstein said was possible. So it's certainly not Einstein's fault that they took something he explained in one way and they perverted it completely into something else. I mean, Einstein said you wouldn't see these damn things because it'd be so uselessly weak. So that's part of the, you know, you're blaming the wrong people, I guess. So I would argue that Einstein and Schrodinger were better at opposing the woo. Now, if they had never existed, you'd argue there would have never been their argument against it, and maybe they poorly argued. You know, and so, I mean, I think the Schrodinger cat analogy is kind of a good analogy to point out how ludicrous the thing is. Einstein saying, you know, does the moon disappear when we're not looking at it? That's a pretty good statement. You know, these oppositions to the spooky action. Spooky action as a statement is pretty good, even though his own gravity theory was spooky action. But so I don't think those two are the critical players. So you could argue Bohr, if Bohr never existed, we might get somewhere, because maybe we wouldn't have gotten stuck with this gravitational model of atoms, and maybe they would have figured out that the static model of an atom works better. The charge model, doesn't need motion. It just needs counterbalancing charges to keep its structure. So, and those would have been, they would have expedited maybe a better understanding, and you wouldn't have built hadron colliders and all this other stuff seeking all these other particles, because you would have kind of known this is the elemental stuff, this is the stuff that matters, and whatever else you're seeing isn't really relevant. So that would be one of the subjects, is why all this crap is bullshit. And so I give you a little preview of some of that. I mean, I've sort of pointed to it already, and the point is that all the stuff they see, all these extra particles, neutrinos, taus, and all kinds of muons and stuff, all these extra particles are a different kind. They don't even use the word decay in the same way, because the decay is really a decay in their velocity. So like when a muon decays, what you're really doing is stopping it from moving. Okay, so it's not decaying like a radioactive isotope. It's decaying in the sense that velocity is decaying. That's a very different kind of decay. But they all decay into something, right? There's some particle that's left over, some piece of stuff, and there's this energy that goes somewhere else. And so they're just using these little ghosty ideas that, they have some substance, the substance gets hit by something, they know that some particle flies off of it, a ray of some kind, and it hits something else, and that causes some other reaction, and if this is an atom, it breaks the atom in two, and so they just kind of make up all this stuff and say, well, this is a neutrino, or this is a this, or this is that. And really all it could be is that it could be just different forms of energy. That is, different amounts. I could take a gamma ray, or just even the idea of a photon as energy separated by distance, and that's its frequency, all moving the same way and a little bit out of alignment to create polarization. Well, I could say there was 10 of them, I could say there was 100 of them, and then if I did have them in a row, and I had them very close, very small frequency, you could sort of understand that if they were behind an electron, okay, and they're all going this way, and each interaction used up one of those pieces, so the electron moves, and then it hits something, and then one of the pieces flies off, and then it hits something, it still moves because the new one hits it, so it keeps going, moves again, and it hits something, another piece flies off that way, another piece flies off, another piece flies off. You could sort of understand that the electron is being pushed by a certain amount of energy, and it will keep moving it in a direction, and eventually you'll run out of energy, though. Eventually you'll use up all of these cue balls that are stacked up behind it, and it won't go anywhere anymore. You'll just have an electron. Now I would argue that's what a muon is. Okay, now, and it might be that there's actually two electrons, in the process, that you've stacked two electrons. So you can understand you can have different arrangements of energy and elemental particles, and those different arrangements will produce different results. So you could have a proton, okay, that's being pushed by an X-ray, or you could have a proton that's being pushed by a gamma ray, something much more, much tighter frequency. So something that's blippy, and then something that's much more, more pressure. And so maybe you think it makes sense to call this a positron, because it's going faster than the other one, but it's not really. Okay, so I'm just saying all that particle zoo stuff can go away. It's all irrelevant. There's quarks. There's no, it's not a quark. They never saw a quark. All they saw was stuff move. Okay, and they're blaming, oh, well, it moved because quarks came out of a proton. They don't know that. It's just this proton could have gone this way, and the force behind it was set free. So if you move this quickly enough, it moves out of this ray, and then this ray ends up going here, and you have energy going this way, and so you measure this, and you say, oh, that's a quark, or something like that. So I'm just saying a better theory would get rid of all of these ghost particles that really play no role. They don't do anything. They don't make atoms more understandable in any way. They don't make chemistry work better. They're useless. So all of that is wasted energy, I would argue. We have all these smart people, and I say smart with such reservations now because smart people are so dumb. They're selectively intelligent. It's that kind of world now where everybody, you could take people that are generally logical, are more grounded in their understanding, so they learn earth science, and then they build on this science. And now it's all specialty. So you can have somebody who's a really good coder, but he's really bad at tying his shoes, and then you can have somebody who's really good at whatever, some kind of mathematical geometric formulas or something. But yeah, he doesn't wash his hands. Yeah, there's no consistency. Knowledge doesn't really, it's not a generalized thing where I suppose in the past you had to be generally intelligent. That was more what was likely to make you useful than specialty intelligence. Now specialty intelligence makes you useful versus, the idiot savant kind of thing. Savants are very useful because of the specialization that exists now. Where before savants were just a pain in the ass, even though they were good at one thing, they were so bad at everything else that they fucked everything up. They sank your boat while they, repaired the hole in it. Some kind of argument like that. It's hard to value intelligence is all I'm saying. Intelligence in one thing doesn't mean intelligence in other things like it did in the past. In the past, people were either well educated or not well educated, and that means they either had a broad education, and now it's a specialized education, and the broad part's been lost. I suppose you could compare it to like athletes or something, right? Athletes are now specialized, so they don't even have to look athletic anymore, right? Because their specialty is doing one thing, like, being a refrigerator. Just falling on somebody is their talent. So it's just kind of different. Better or worse, hard to say. Okay, if Einstein would have never been born and no one had ever heard of curved space or superposition. So again, superposition I don't think was Schrodinger's fault. But whatever. So do you think the biggest difference would be, what do you think, the biggest 100 years later in terms of practical science? Well, the point is clearly you'd have a lot of smart people that wouldn't be wasting their time on all of this mushy, silly theory, right? Trying to figure out whether they can turn mass into some sort of bent space and then catch the waves billions of light years away and see an event that happened billions of years ago. Yeah, maybe you wouldn't have people wasting their time on that one. And so they would be doing something more productive, like maybe making a flux capacitor, making something that would be able to store energy more efficiently. Like I said, there's lots of things that it seems they haven't devoted much energy to scientifically, that we, the people, haven't said, let's figure out how to do it the right way. Like even solar panels, right? I mean, it's this idea of collecting solar energy and converting it into electricity. Well, what's the best way to do that? What's the most passive, environmentally friendly, blah, blah, blah. And doesn't, we already have knowledge of the inefficiencies, and we don't care. And that's the weird part, right? I mean, we're subsidized putting them on roofs, which destroys 50% of the value of the panels. I mean, right off the bat, at least 50%. It might even be worse than that. More than 50% of the value of the panel is thrown away because you put it on a roof instead of putting it on the ground and pointing it at the sun. I mean, and then you get into the whole conversion arguments, creating a bunch of individual converters on each individual house. It's just so wasteful when you could do it all with one converter. I mean, it's just so stupid, an application of the technology. And so apparently there aren't any scientists saying that's true, because nobody's being paid to analyze it and figure out the best way to do it. What we should be subsidizing instead of what we are subsidizing. And all of that doesn't have much to do with science. It has to do with capitalists making money and, the corruption of politics, that this asshole, selfish, what's in it for me as a businessman perspective versus what's in it for us as human beings. So I don't think this really has to do with some specific problem of science. It has to do with a specific problem with human beings, and the fact that they haven't been trained to be civilized or to give a fuck, or to understand that it's not about you, it's about us, and what's going to make it possible for us to be on our boat and sail successively through the storms and all of this other stuff. And that's what science should be teaching the human race, is they're smart enough to do some analysis and figure out that this boat won't float. But they just keep rebuilding Titanics. They keep giving the public what it wants: bigger, fatter, and more useless. Stories. And so they've given them quantum mechanics, which is giving them some hope that God lives, and that probably more than anything else is why it still exists as a theory, because it leaves this crack of hope that humans can justify their eccentricity and their bullshit. I can't help it. My brain's quantum. I can't see the truth. I don't have to obey the rules. We'll have quantum criminals pretty soon. Anyway. What do you think the biggest difference would be 100 years later? So I don't know. The biggest difference would be is that we would have more available intelligence to work on something. But again, what would the intelligence be working on? Right? You hear about Google. Google is this great, I didn't do my Google thing, but, this great corporation, and it only hires smart people. Smart people to do what? Figure out how to pop an ad up on your screen in such a way that you fall for it. Or that you can't figure out how to get rid of it, or that you accidentally click on it. I mean, all of this intelligence is devoted to this insanely malicious purpose. That we all pay for. A huge giant price is paid, to engineer visibility, to engineer a capacity to be heard or to seen on all of this. And it's all this competing, me. I need to be seen. You shouldn't be seen. I should be seen. And fuck. That ain't gonna work. So if you're gonna eliminate one waste and just replace it with another wasteful behavior, then there's no point in freeing your science from bad ideas, because they're just going to pick another bad idea to be devoted to use their intelligence to try to do something else stupid. All right, so there might be much difference. Again, you won't. There's no savings if you're not smart enough to know how to do anything right. If you're not smart enough not to poo in your drinking water, it's really not going to save you that you devoted a few extra scientists to doing something different. If the difference is going to be something just as dumb. Anyway, all right. Do you think wave theory is holding us back from further discoveries? Well, it's certainly a way of evading the real, the recognition of determinism, the recognition that the universe is just making robots, that there isn't any special function, that there's just a bunch of ordered mechanical rules, and the rules are really simple, and the complexity is just emergent noise. It isn't really structured by anything intelligent. It's just a manifestation of the fact that stuff will condense into clumps. It's clumpy, and that we're just clumps with a bunch of millions of years worth of pattern making, and some of the patterns are now very durable, like our DNA molecule. And so it's just another durable pattern that now exists in the universe, just like the atoms themselves are durable patterns. There's lots of patterns of atoms themselves that are now durable patterns. They have a mechanism to keep them survivable, and they survive, and that's all. All right, do you think wave theory is holding on discoveries? Yeah, discoveries, like I said, understanding how it works will, like I kind of envision that I believe there might be some chain reaction that you can cause that'll blow the whole universe up. Might be possible. Something like that, and that you're more likely to find it if you understand how the thing works rather than misunderstanding how it works. But yes, what discovery would we need? Like I said, even if we had more energy, what would we do with it? We'd make more problems. We'd make more pollution and dirt and do more environmental damage. So it's almost like anything you could imagine that we could fix, we would find a way of turning that into crap. The conservation principle, in a way, would turn whatever good there is into another bad we have to fix. There's this symptom of the fact that you just, any action has a reaction, and we're constantly just creating new bad actions with every reaction we have. Every cure ends up having too much of a disease tied to it. Anyway, a new disease. Okay, so I just don't, we have so much, and we're doing so little with it. You could argue, so much of our structure is waste. Most people have jobs that shouldn't exist. It's just a fact, because of the insensible inefficiencies of how we function as a society. We have people, again, who are drilling holes in the boat while other people are patching them, and it's just, there's so much make work out of the inefficiency of how we function. So we already have a bunch of technology to live much better lives, and instead all we do is waste. We give a bunch of money to silly billionaires. They force people to go to work to build their yachts that never get even, there's yachts that never really went anywhere. They're just for parties. They don't exist to do anything but go out into the harbor and turn their lights on and play their music, and they never go anywhere. But millions of man hours of work for crap. All of this wasted labor. Importing marble and doing this and doing all this horse shit that just is useless. It doesn't make life really better on planet Earth at all. It just makes people extravagant and dependent on their extravagance. They get really bad habits, and then they become dependent on their really bad habit. I need real flowers in my house, and I need them changed every day, and I need, they start needing things that are just so silly. I need a new floor because this floor is, 6 weeks old, and that it's just such nonsense. And somehow it's been made to be a truth that we somehow voted for it. I didn't vote for it, so I don't know exactly how it got voted for, but I didn't vote for it. But anyway, so Superior Mind responds, and so I'll read that. What the hell? I'm not draft science, but personally I'd say the amount of gravity near the center of a very large mass would drop on a gradient. Although you'd never know because the external pressure from the matter, so this is the gravity argument, which most physicists will already concede. So, it's not, you don't gain any new knowledge from understanding gravity. See, the irony is that Einstein's theory of gravity is actually taught as particle gravity, as push gravity. That's how it's taught. Okay, it's not taught as a bent space. It's taught as a convergence. That somehow energy is converging, okay, on the center of a gravity. And that's how it's taught. It's taught that there's an endless supply of stuff coming in, and there's an endless drain draining it out. It's not a bent fabric in 3 dimensions. Okay, so it's already taught as, the particle theory. It's just that they don't account for the particles because of the drag problem, and I've explained why that's not a problem. So anyway, so it's sort of the joke of it, is that they can't teach it as bent space, because obviously in 3 dimensions you can't bend space in 3 dimensions. It's a ludicrous proposition. But the idea that it would be an infinite well, that you could, these are just silly notions that, okay, you have electrons in the universe and somehow I piled them all into the same space. I just stack them inside the same exact space to create some sort of mega gravity thing, black hole crap. Well, that theory is just silly on its face. And why would you even think that's possible? Except to create this fantasy, of infinite wells. It's just, it's nonsense. But anyway, the gravity theory, okay, is really just the understanding. The difference would be is that you're understanding that there's a real size to this thing. So it is like the difference between, you taking your foot, okay, and stomping on something, okay, and the difference is that if I understood your foot to be just a bunch of tiny little particles, okay, tiny little bits, and so it's just this sort of this raindrop argument. You're just breaking force into little bits, and then the little bits act on the thing, so the little rain can hit, and it hits bits here and hits bits here and hits bits. So you're pushing something not by pushing just a few atoms on the surface. You're pushing them much deeper and much more of them, but in the end it's still going to end up with a certain amount of force. And now, once the atoms are moving, the atoms make the other atoms move. So it becomes the same thing as the foot when you get deeper into it. So it's like the difference between a bullet in the shape of in taking all the mass and having it as one bullet and hit a surface, and taking all of that mass and spreading it, okay, into little tiny bullets, and understanding that if I do that to the surface, I'll move the surface much more effectively than if I hit it with the bullet and just make a hole in it. So all acceleration isn't the same. So Einstein's kind of silly notion that acceleration is acceleration isn't really true. Accelerating from gravity is very different than getting accelerated by a bullet. One's more efficient in transferring the energy than the other one, if your objective is to move it rather than just put a hole in it. That kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, those aren't out of their reach right now, understanding that kind of idea, that the gravity creates the internal pressure inside the Earth. The pressure inside the Earth is huge, gigantic. There's no gravity, but there's all kinds of pressure, okay, because the atoms are moving. They're piled on top of each other, pushing down, you know. So the deeper you go, the greater the pressure gets. And that pressure is all created by gravity. That pressure all starts, you know, it's just the hole in the ground argument. The pressure is coming down, but it will go sideways if there's less pressure. So if you dig out some of the pressure, you obviously create a pressure void, and then now the pressure that's going down will shoot into the low pressure you've created. All right, so I don't know if this is worth reading, but I'll just finish it. Hypothetically, if there were possible to make something like a hollow bubble to shield matter, anything inside it would float. Well, that's at the center. I mean, you still have some gravity no matter where your imbalance is. So again, we're just saying gravity is just an imbalance. It's not really an amount of something. It's an amount of imbalance. So, you know, you've absorbed gravity from both sides. You know, you still have an imbalance here and here, you know, until you get right to the center where you're back to being balanced again. That is, you could absorb all of the gravity and there's none, or there's still a ton of gravity. You won't know the difference. So it's really just about knowing the difference between what's on one side and what's on the other side. It's how many things are hitting you is all that really matters. And whether they hit you or they hit, you know, what part of you, whether they hit the atom on the surface or they hit the atom in here, isn't really going to matter in the end. It's all the same, because the atom moving is the same as the force moving. It just takes longer for atoms to push atoms than it takes for force to push atoms. Okay, like a hollow bubble, yes, so you'll be floating inside. This is because the potential for external force returns to equilibrium in the center. So again, it's just about the existence of imbalance, and that's what we call energy, is where there's imbalance. But that's really all energy is. You just, you know, you divert something, right? And you say you just diverted something by turning it left and right, and one thing goes a bigger square than the other thing to get back, and so one thing hits you first and then the other thing hits you, kind of thing. It's a, well, that's probably not a good example. The point is it's just changes in what gets to you, and what gets to you depends on what kind of matter is in the way of the force getting to you. It's that, you know, the universe starts off equal, and all the little stuff around you changes that equality. This is because the potential for external force returns to equilibrium in the center. Anywhere off center, the mass has more force from one direction than the other. Yes, so any, you know, just, I can sit in the middle of the universe and put a half inch of lead on one side of me and a full inch of lead on the other side, and because I did that, more force is going to get through the half inch than going to get through the full inch, and therefore I'm going to end up, you know, moving. If one has a proper understanding of the mechanism for gravitation, there is at least some tiny of a chance of figuring out how or whether it is possible to bypass force equilibrium. Well, we know that magnets already do something sort of interesting, in the sense that they're, without getting hot or doing anything funky, they're diverting the force. So we know they can divert it. They can take something that's going this way and they can change it into this dimension or that dimension, and they do it for free. Okay, that looks like it doesn't cost anything. You don't need energy to make that happen. At least you don't need any new energy. You don't need to use a laser beam or use some other thing to do the deflecting. The deflecting is just something the matter naturally does. And that's why wrenches can keep flying through space, and lots of other reasons. It's because of this ability to just engineer a piece of matter that can turn force for free. And that probably is the source of all manipulation of energy in some constructive way. So that means you can take imbalances anywhere and point them. And if you can point the imbalances from other places, you can steal the energy that exists in imbalances in other places. Like stealing the lightning, or stealing, when satellites go around a planet and gain velocity, they're stealing some of the momentum of the planet, stealing some of its orbital momentum by orbiting the planet for a while and having it drag it along, and it stole a little bit of velocity. All right. But it's all stealing. That's all you can do here is steal energy. So, and so it's just finding a place to steal it that's kind of safe. You could argue that if they didn't spend all that money on the Hadron Collider and they spent it on engineering better nuclear power plants, we might have something more useful out of the expenditure. If all those scientists had devoted to one purpose, that is trying to find a way to make plants safer and more efficient, we probably gain something from that. Or even doing tidal things. There's so much energy in the tides. You can, just all of that volume of water and gravity and blah blah blah. Figuring out efficient ways to use the existing land resources to create that hydroelectric energy. But they weren't devoted to that purpose. All right, it's kind of like how recent video I was pointed out that the elevator with the rocket accelerating a person is pushing particles together, which is not the same as gravity, and that gravity is acting on all particles simultaneously due to a lack of surrounding equilibrium. So it's just important to understand that you can accelerate things in really dramatically different ways, and when force causes acceleration, it does so much more efficiently than when you're forcing matter to cause matter to move. Force moves matter more efficiently than matter moves matter. Okay, because it has to go through, obviously the matter has force between it, and so, but it's just that you're likely to waste more energy going the wrong way. You're trying to make something go this way, and you'll end up making a lot of stuff go this way, and that's what you want to eliminate. You want to try to take this way and have everything just go that way without wasting any energy going this way. And so on. Let's see. Are being acted on at once. If we keep encouraging university students, science journalists, and so on to play games with quantum make-believe and pretentious, mind-blowing paradoxes, there's a danger of heading further and further off course. And the course is just this idea that, again, how can I make this argument without pointing to the glaring fact is why are they falling for it? It's not like this stuff is well evidenced. Again, the argument I've been saying for 10 years is their evidence is so weak. How can they be so arrogant? They have a tiny little, it seems like, kind of evidence. It's barely evidence. It's barely even any reason to believe. There's barely any reason to hope. It's almost like, you got the first two numbers on the lottery ticket right. Well, you can rationally know that that's a long way from meaning anything. Getting 2 is like, yeah, that's easy. Getting 6, that's really hard. So it can seem like, but there's no reason to think it's like. Okay, so it seems like you're winning, but you're really not. And I would argue that these experiments where they're doing this crap where they're saying, well, because tidal waves do this, or, therefore photons are waves because in one circumstance they create something kind of similar. And that's all they have. They have these really weak connections. And, that's the part you're just saying, well, now it's pretty hopeless, right? If the rules of evidence don't matter, if you really can go to trial, and you can just say the guy looks guilty, and we sort of have a smudgy fingerprint that's could be him or could be actually 6,783,000 other guys, but he's one in that 6 million. you know, um, we figured out the perpetrator. We know he was a male, and he's a male, so pretty guilty, huh? That's what's being used as, that's how they're judging the evidence. I mean, the evidence is so bad, and this really is just a trial by pop culture, and it's fun, and it's interesting, or some other kind of crap, and it doesn't really have anything to do with this stuff actually having any integrity. Now, why institutions buy into this, when they're ignorant and they're, basically being convinced by some spiel they're given. So I can understand why they built LIGO, because of the military, right? The military says, well, maybe we can use this shit. And maybe there's some truth to the Hadron Collider. Maybe they think they're going to make a better nuclear bomb or something. So they invest in this crap. That the industrial complex seeps into it. And they have some, side agenda. And so I'm sure that's what got LIGO built, is they're thinking, well, maybe we can listen to Russian conversations, and we can do this, and we can do that. We can certainly monitor nuclear bomb explosions and do other things with this LIGO thing. So that's why it was built. But that's not good either. But certainly knowing the truth isn't going to help anybody fix the fact that there's so many people willing to do these things for all these dishonest reasons and not even be honest about the dishonesty. Okay, if we keep encouraging university students and science journalists and so on to play games with quantum make-believe and pretentious mind-blowing paradoxes, there's a danger of heading further and further off course of the correct interpretations of the evidence, and thus away from an accurate model. Well, again, what will an accurate model do for you? Okay, they don't really want to hear it because there's no God in it. And so that's part of the problem, I would argue. You really are just, you're replacing knowledge of demons, with knowledge of brain function. So you're giving them a reason it happens, but you're not giving them a cure, automatically. You're just giving them the knowledge that, it happened when he was a fetus. So you're giving them very little difference in why the person's crazy, except, where to go to look. You can't stop it by making a demon shield. You can't put a demon helmet on and save yourself from being crazy. So we know we can't do that. But I mean, it's not the difference it's going to make isn't enough of a difference, unfortunately. And I would argue that most of the difference is in understanding the philosophical implications of a mechanical universe versus a universe of woo and magic. Okay, accurate model, and it's hard to say what progress we may have already missed out on because of this, or what solutions we may develop with a better understanding in the future. So I guess I would just argue that any technological advances we get, we abuse. So we're really bad at using advantage. So any advantage we get, it's like we turn everything into a sword, and we turn everything into a whacking device of some kind. So we invent a hoe, and then we figure out, well, we can kill shit with it too. I mean, everything gets perverted. So any technology you give human beings is probably not a good idea, because they'll abuse it. They won't read the instructions. They won't read their warnings. They won't pay attention to using it the right way. And it's like being in business or something. You make ladders, and you find out I'm going to be sued because some asshole used the ladder as a bridge or something, or you did something stupid with it. It's not my fault he's an idiot. But that's the human race. You give him something, and he will try to suck way too much out of it. He'll just keep trying to make it do what it can't do. Just out of his gluttony. We will ravage, the territory. We'll eat all the grass and there'll be no grass, that kind of thing. We will destroy it, stealing its energy. We'll cut down rainforests and replace them with, cows. And it's hard to say what progress we may have already missed out on. Okay, we did that. Solution might have developed a better understanding of the future. There are some obvious things that people should be considering, like in the video, the size of the electron and how we already know they'll interact. Yeah, well, that I haven't gotten to yet, but yeah, I don't think they understand sizes very well. I mean, it's clear that atoms really can't be, a billion bits of empty space for every electron, because you could never hit an electron. You could go through, to reflect light off of a substance, you'd have to go through millions of atoms before you'd actually hit an electron. So it doesn't make too much sense, their model. They got something wrong. It's not about mass, it's about size. Okay, and their descriptions of size seems to be way off. It's not just physics that seems to suffer from confused, pretentious psychology. There seems to be a bit of religion of some form or another being injected into every field of study. Well, everything wants to make everything special. I mean, we make retarded people special, and we make this, it's all of this distortion and perversion out of some will that the truth not be the truth. We're not ugly, or we're not deformed, or we're not, this, and we're not that, and we're not. Everything's not what it is. It's all special and good and fun and pleasant, and, and nobody wants to deal with anything harsh and brutal about life. That is that, it has to have a certain efficiency. I mean, if you waste $1 million to save one child, you had to murder 10 children or more to do that, right? I mean, if you waste $1 million of resources to save one child, the fact of the matter is that I could take that $1 million and I could buy human life for probably 100,000 kids, right? That would be a $10 difference, right? $10 will actually save a human being from dying in the third world. So those are real facts, and they don't want to deal with any of these real facts. They want magical solutions. They want solutions that don't exist, that aren't possible. Everybody wins kind of crap. That's not how the universe is made. Everybody can't win. Everybody, it doesn't work that way. And this new physics is trying to offer that. Some form or another being injected to every field of study, each having its own 10 commandments. I don't know if it goes that far, but clearly they do emphasize the woo, the magic of it all. Thou shalt nots and thou shalts. Well, they certainly are defensive of the basic, the wrong turn they took 100 years ago. So they're just rationalizing those wrong turns, and you can't undo them now. There's no way to reject bent space, and there's no way to reject, woo mechanics. Most fields strike me as being overtly dogmatic in universities, and that sort of dogmatistic psychology gets out into the real world, contaminating everything. Yeah, well, whatever, bandwagon, I mean, it is this momentum issue. It just gets so much momentum, and people just can't see that momentum is all illegitimate. So they fall for it. But I don't, I still question why. What's the fundamental difference between me and everyone, almost on the planet, in the sense that to me, when I was introduced to these silly theories, you say, what do you mean? I mean, gremlins? Spooky action. You're telling me spooky action. Spooky action how? I mean, what? Bent space is not an ant. What the hell's a bent space? It doesn't make any sense. Call it bent ether, and then you have to defend the existence of whatever this ether crap is. But don't tell me bent nothing. You can't bend nothing. And then, of course, you can't bend it in 3 dimensions. It's even more preposterous. So why are we even talking about bending crap? Bending crap isn't what makes the universe go round. That's just bullshit. Bending nothing. Why do people fall for it? I mean, it's on its face a non-existent answer. It's nothing. It's such crap. And then these waves that go everywhere but don't go anywhere. I mean, what are you talking about? How does it go everywhere without changing everywhere? How is it, viable to be pretending to go everywhere and then decide you only went to one place and all of the other yous, the invisible other yous, just disappear somehow? I mean, it's horse shit. Problem is, most people aren't thinking outside the box. Well, they're thinking inside a box that's just crazy. So I guess that would be my argument. They're in a crazy box, because I don't even think being in almost no box is better than... no box means you ask for the evidence. No box means that you say, what are you talking about, gremlins? What do you mean? What? Dark matter? It does everything we want it to, but nothing we don't? It's just the perfect invisible man. I mean, isn't that just a god? Okay. That was built around their brain, or whatever they'd like to admit it or not. They blindly follow the biggest mob. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's the biggest mob, but it's they blindly attach devotion to, like being Yankee fans or Red Sox fans. Somehow they get caught up in this mythology. I suppose I did to some extent too. I mean, when I first watched Carl Sagan's Cosmos, I was like, oh, this is so cool that they're talking about this and blah, blah, blah. But, by the time he got to the Drake equation, yeah, it all blew up. And I said, what a pile of shit. This isn't about the truth. This is about wishful thinking. They can find, regardless of how ridiculous this God is. So, yeah, so they have a ridiculous team they're rooting for. And why they're rooting for the, spooky action team, it's hard to figure out why smart people say that's a good answer when it's a really shitty answer. I'm sorry, I started going off topic. Yeah, see, the topic is tough because, again, I would argue, part of my interest in this subject is the fact that I am such a determinist at nature. I mean, my nature says this is a machine. This is a mechanical mechanism. It doesn't do magical things. Things don't just poof. Nothing just happens out of nowhere. Everything happens for a reason, a cause. There's a cause and effect universe. That's it, I suppose. I started rooting very young for the cause and effect team because I could see it in myself. I could see that if all my behavior was being controlled by thoughts, and those thoughts came from somewhere. And I realized that, well, yeah, I'm a selfish asshole. Good things should happen to me, and if bad things have to happen, definitely somebody else should have the bad things happen. I mean, it was that kind of simple deduction, and I could see the cause and effect in it. I could see that I didn't do anything for a magic reason. I couldn't play the piano. I couldn't do anything, okay, until I learned how to do it. There just wasn't any magic to this. I couldn't even write my fucking name. I had to learn how to do it. So, and I guess and then this gets into the deeper argument of this whole woo physics is really an attack on determinism. It's an attack on cause and effect. It's, and that's why I think it has the appeal it has, is because that's really what people are looking for. They're looking for another religion and they just don't want one that's, you know, dressed in God clothes, but they'll take one in any other form. I mean, it can be a bunny rabbit, it can be anything. You know, any God will do, and that's it. You know, they just want a God that doesn't hate homos. You know, it could be exactly like the old God. You know, it doesn't hate homos, so yeah, everything's okay now. Everything's right with the universe. Yeah, no, something's been wrong for a very long time, and no one's paying any attention. All of the wasted suffering and the wasted energy and the wasted pursuit, redoing the same contests over and over and over again. You know, redoing the Olympics essentially. For what purpose? You know, why? Just watch the old one if you need to watch a gladiator war. Why do you need to have a new version, you know, of the same agony and defeat bullshit? Stupid. So that's part of this whole psychology part of why, you know, it's only part of it. Obviously, I was, you know, this all started in like the 6th grade and then the 9th grade. You know, as soon as I saw that ugly, disgusting drawing of a photon, I was like, I'm not in this. No, there's just no way that's the truth. It's just too silly a diagram of something so damn simple. There's no way that fucking shit is doing all that wacky crap. So anyway, and you know, that's been a bug floating around in my head my whole life, almost. That can't be the right answer. Just can't be. Too silly. And you go on after all the other too silly stuff, you know. And just, it's everywhere. I mean, everything we do is so inefficient. The politics, the democracy, the government, the legal, it's all just covered in Google crap. You know, scummy self-interest shit. Alright, so enough of a video, I guess. So not as much physics as it should have been, but whatever and such. I'm working on different things. Just there was nothing else really to, you know, nothing, no other comments, nothing really to discuss. So I just decided this is, well, anyway, this is the video of the day. It'll have to do. Better luck tomorrow and such.